Hey guys, thanks for being here today. We're ready to get started, and I want to take a moment and say thank you for everybody who came down to the AHR Expo and came up and saw my presentation there on avoiding marketing landmines for your HVAC and plumbing company. I appreciate you guys all being there. We had 150 people in the room or thereabouts. They were turning people away at the door, so it was fantastic to see you all there. And the response has been great. So many of you have emailed me and text messaged me and called me asking for the slides, asking for follow-up, a couple people with some questions, and heck, a couple requests, could I do that presentation for their team. So thank you so much for all the outreach. And in that outreach, especially through the text messages, I've gotten a lot of questions about one little section in there where we talked about broken metrics for our industry. And I wanted to flesh that out a little bit more because a lot of you had questions about what I had talked about in the presentation down there. So that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about broken metrics that we use to measure in the HVAC and plumbing industry, our marketing and its success. And so we're going to take a look at all the metrics we use in the industry really to measure how successful a marketing program is. And we really use three different techniques for that. We have our cost per call, our average ticket, and our ROI. And they're pretty simple. We're going to walk through all of them one by one, talk a little bit about how we use them, and then the problem with measuring your marketing that way. So we'll knock them out one by one. And we're going to start with cost per call, cost per click. And the big question people always have is, what's the issue? What's the reason we're going to dig into these the way we are? Well, the big issue is that we often use these things to evaluate the success of a marketing program. And part of the problem can be the timeline. Part of the problem can be what we're evaluating, how we're evaluating. The real issue is, as we look at companies, what we find is that HVAC and plumbing companies bounce around from marketing company to marketing company, especially when it comes to digital companies, every 12 to 18 months. And, with mail companies, television companies, things of that nature, they might be a little bit more limited in their options, but still they're making those changes very consistently, year over year. The problem with it is that they're making those changes based on metrics that have some very serious flaws and that fail to actually look at some of the problems and the issues they might actually be facing, which would make them more successful. And there's a real good chance, if you use these metrics incorrectly, you could shut down a program that was really driving sales for your business. So let's take a look at a couple of them. Cost per call, cost per click. Real simple metric. All you're doing here is looking at how much did it cost for me to get a call, to get into the house, or how much did it cost for me to get somebody on my website. That's it. It's a real simple measure. I spent X, I got X number of clicks or calls, I divide one by the other. And everyone always tells us when we're talking to them, as we're walking through the marketing process, as we're talking about their business, that they want cheaper leads. That's always part of the conversation with 80-90% of everyone we speak to here at Stochastic. Everybody tells me they want cheaper leads. And the problem with that is that when you are looking at cheaper leads, you are mistaking the idea that every lead is created equal. You are making the mistake of assuming that I want to buy the lowest cost calls because all calls are the same. And we know that just can't be true. We know there are people in your marketplace who are more likely to buy from you based on their geography, based on their demographics, based on their wealth. We know that there are people who are more likely, homes that you're more equipped to go into and walk out with a major repair, with a replacement sale, with a repipe job. There are vast differences, and buying cheaper leads usually results in getting cheaper tickets, lower sales. If you buy all the leads you can buy at $25, a pitch I make whenever I'm in front of a big room of people, I love to make the pitch, how many of you would buy all the leads I could sell you today in your marketplace at $25 a pop, within a 25-mile or 20-mile range of your shop? And almost everybody raises their hand universally. And that's a terrible bet because we know most of the business comes in a much smaller circumference from your business, and sometimes as little as a mile or two. It could be 80-90% of your sales. And we know once you get outside of those areas where you're concentrated, once you get outside of those areas where you do more than $100,000 in sales, what we here at Stochastic would call a primary zip code, your chances of producing a new customer fall by 7 times on average. Your chances of when you get into a house, which again, 7 times less likely you're going to get into a new customer house, you'll be 2.5 times less likely to find a replacement sale. And so we know that all calls are not created equal. We know when you get into the house of someone who's in their 20s and early 30s, your chances of finding an opportunity is significantly lower than if you're in someone in their mid to late 50s, early 60s. We know, universally, I think everyone on this call knows, if you get into a 4-year-old house versus a 15-year-old house, your chances of finding an opportunity are significantly lower. So the cost per call aspect of that, you can throw that out the window because we know that it's worth paying more to get into those better homes because the output is so much higher. The chance of you finding an install, the chance of you finding a high-dollar job is so much higher. Cost per click, well, clicks by and large for our industry are useless. People call us when they have a problem, meaning if they go to your website, no matter the amount of time they spend there, if they don't call and they don't chat with you, they're gone. They either got there for the wrong reasons, another problem with your marketing, right? Or they're on your site, saw something on your site, probably couldn't find the phone number, and then made the decision to go somewhere else. People reach out to us when they have a problem. They go to our websites when they have a problem. Sure, there are jobs, but those, where people are planning something out, they're building something, changing something in their home, they need a repipe job in a year, or they're remodeling a bathroom. But those are the minority of times people are looking for us. The majority of the time people are looking for us is when we have a major problem or we think we have a problem and it's a time-sensitive issue. That's when people reach out to us. So the amount of clicks you get doesn't matter. All that matters from your website, from your web presence, is the number of calls and chats you actually have with customers. So the cost per click is irrelevant to our industry. So those are the problems with our cost per call, cost per click analysis, treating all calls, all houses as if they were the same. When we talk about average ticket, we get into a whole different slew of problems. This is less about the quality and more about what we're actually doing with the number. Now, average ticket is a fantastic tool for measuring your technician versus your technician. So how is Tanya doing today when she goes into houses? How's Tanya doing this month when she goes into houses? How's Tanya doing this year when she goes into houses versus how Troy's doing, right? How are they doing? What's the average ticket across the company? What's the average ticket of my individual technician? And the reason that is such a powerful tool in your business is because it's in your business. You're comparing apples to apples. Your technicians have much of the same training. They're getting into the same kinds of houses by and large. They're in the same area, the same weather patterns. Everything about it is the same, including the measurement itself. And because all of those things are the same, it's a decent way, or it's a really good way, honestly, for you to evaluate how well a technician is doing in the field. The problem with average ticket is actually when we take it outside of that. As soon as we take it and we go to other companies and say, what was the average ticket when you did this? What was the average ticket on this marketing piece? What was the average ticket that I should expect when I do this, when I market this, when I get into these kinds of homes? The problem with it is real simple. Average ticket, as beautiful as it is not comparing apples to apples. Everybody uses a little bit different system. Now, if you were in the room down in Florida when we brought up average ticket, you'll remember that I asked the people in the room, how many of you count warranties in your average ticket? About a quarter of the room raised their hand. How many of you count maintenances? About a quarter of the room raised their hand. How many of you count callbacks? About a tenth of the room raised their hand. And we went item after item. I went through 5 or 6 different items. And every time Some people raise their hand. Some people raise their hand multiple times. Some people raise their hands only once. Almost everyone almost raised their hand, but a couple people never did. And what that means is that when we're measuring average ticket and we compare company to company, we're comparing different things. Because if I count warranties and you don't, we have totally different numbers. If I count callbacks and you don't, we have totally different numbers. It's not the same equation, so we won't end up with the same results. So we can't compare those results. It's not an apples to apples comparison. And here's the funny part about average ticket. When I sit down at breakfast a lot of mornings, when I go to a conference, I'll sit at a table, and there'll all inevitably just be a discussion about how a marketing program is working. What was your average ticket in those houses? And then once they finish the conversation, I'll raise the question. And almost always, the two people don't calculate their average ticket. In fact, I don't know that there was any time they did calculate it the same way. And that'll start a different conversation about all the different ways of all the different people at the table calculate their average ticket. And my favorite moment is when two guys from the same company, and this happens so often it's not even funny, but it is in its own way. Two guys from the same company will find that they've been calculating average ticket differently. The service manager and the sales manager, the GM and the service manager, the owner and the GM are calculating those two numbers differently within their own company. And that's the flaw with average ticket. We don't have a set of rules for calculating it. So we're all calculating in a different system, and you can't compare apples to oranges. They're not the same thing. Finally, we get to everyone's favorite, ROI, the bane of all marketers' existence. What was my return on investment? And return on investment is a fantastic way of ruining a perfectly good marketing program. And let me explain what I mean by that. When we look at return on investment, what you're looking at is I spent on a marketing program, and the results were this many sales. In fact, a lot of you have this built into your Service Titan platform or one of the Field Edge, one of the others that, they all do it now where they tag ROI by phone number, by customer name, by address, by marketing piece. They do it all different ways. The problem with it is that return on investment, when we measure it the way we're measuring it here, is like measuring a batting average without counting the number of at-bats the batter had. Only counting the hits, not the strikeouts, not the walks, etc. ROI, the way we calculate it in our industries, is simply a measurement of the number of times I did something in the house, not the number of times that I had an opportunity to do something in the house. Let me explain. If you go into a house and you cannot make a sale, there should be a tally. I got an opportunity. The marketing did its job. The marketing got me into a house and I couldn't sell it. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that, but the usual reason is you just couldn't sell it. There's, as we all know from salesmen who come back in the field and give us every example under the book, but the age of the home was right, the age of the system was right, and the person wanted to replace a unit. Seems like a good lead to me, but you didn't sell it. So the ROI adds nothing to the pot. There's nothing added to the ROI in that situation. It looks like a miss. So the ROI on that is zero. But it shouldn't be zero because the marketing's job is not to sell. That's a sales problem. The marketing's job is to get you the opportunity to sell. And so because we're not measuring how many opportunities we got, because we're not measuring how well we sold, we're never turning the mirror at ourselves, the ROI calculation kind of becomes useless to you. If I don't know whose fault it is, if I've not measured to see the marketing got me 30 opportunities and we only sold 2 of them, well, whose fault is that? So that's problem 1 with ROI. Problem 2 with ROI is this. We know, and if you have sat through my presentation on the alpha chart, or if you were in our presentation down in Florida, if you've been through a mirror review, if you've been at one of our Mirror Score conferences, any one of dozens of places you could have run into the alpha chart. The alpha chart is our breakdown of when a customer by company spends money with that company. And it starts like a birthday, right? So day zero, the first time you knock on the door and generate an invoice with that customer, we start tracking when that revenue comes in. And by and large, about 60% of that money, 65% of that revenue is going to come into your hands by the end of year one. But it's going to happen over that 365 days. A huge chunk of it's going to happen day zero, and then less as the year goes on. Then you're going to get a little bit of a bump. About 10% of the revenue is going to come in from that customer in year two, and then you're going to get about another 10% in year three. And that vary a little bit. Really, by the end of year three, between 75 and 85% of all the business you're going to do with that customer will be done. Here's the problem from ROI. What's the timeline? Most people calculate their ROI based on the time frame of when I think it started and when it stopped. So for a mail piece, that might be as little as 7 days. For a newspaper ad, it might be as little as a day or two. For a television ad, it might be over the course of a year. When we're calculating ROI, we tend to pick a timeline and say, this is the time frame I'm going to calculate it for. Sometimes it's even less, in cases like a newspaper ad or a newspaper ad, piece of mail, etc. We actually calculate the ROI and it ends before the piece actually expires. But we know so much of the business, right? If most of the business happens day one, half of it, let's just say half, which is right about where it's going to be. If 50% of all the business you're going to do happens with a customer in the first 30 days, that means there's another 50% to get. And a good chunk of that, 30%, is going to happen over the next 20 months. So the ROI calculation also doesn't take into account the timeline that the customer does business with us. And then the third thing is we only calculate ROI for things we can measure. And we absolutely ignore everything we can't. What's the ROI on your billboard? What's the ROI on your television? What's the ROI on your radio? What's the ROI on the clover leafing your guys should be doing in the field after they visit a house? When we can't measure it, we just negate it. So we just assume there's no ROI. Well, what about if somebody calls you on a line that isn't the line that they got the letter or newspaper ad from, or they saw on the television? Why would they call you on a different line? Simple. They went to the website, and we all carry in our pockets tiny little electronic phone books that are far faster than trying to transpose a number from some other form. I can simply type in your company name, and if you look, the number one search for any of you will be your name online. It'll be the number one thing you're paying for probably in your ads. It'll be your number one organic search. It'll be some version of your name, spelled correctly, spelled incorrectly, etc. Universally, unless you're a brand spanking new company. So people are going to your website, and then they call you on your website, and if you're using an auto ROI calculator, something like built into, Field Edge, Service Titan, etc., where it's tracking it based on the phone number, that ROI just fell in a bucket, but the person may actually have called you because of some other form of marketing. In fact, it's almost inevitable they did. How would they have known your name? A lot of us like to think that it's because we're so well known in our industry, that we're so well known with what we do. The reality is that most people have no idea that you exist. When we look at market share, 3-5% getting into 3 to 5% of the homes in a market is pretty normal. It's pretty normal that's kind of the high water mark for you. If you're in 10-12%, you're lucky. But that still means that 80-90% of the market has no idea who you are. And they went to your website, they typed in your name, they traced you because they were looking for you based on another form of marketing. So the ROI calculation has so many flaws, and I could go into 5 or 6 more. The problem with it is we tend to measure what we think we're measuring, and we measure it under a timeline we think that's right, and we never, ever look to see if it really did what it said it was supposed to do. The ROI calculation looks at the wrong part of the equation. It should be, what are the opportunities provided to me, not the revenue I got out, because it's the responsibility of the technicians, the salespeople, your training processes, and your culture to drive the money out of the household. The marketing's job is simply to get you the opportunity to be in there. So we have problems with all of these things. I mean, cost per call, average ticket, ROI, and you've got it on the screen there. We can see what the problem, all the calls aren't created equally, so cost per call is kind of thrown out the window. Average tickets inconsistently measured at the best. And of course, ROI only measures the sales, not the opportunities. And that's the big one to remember, because really the opportunity is the job of the marketing. So what metrics should you use if these don't work? Well, I would love to tell you more, but we're just about out of time today. And, today was covering those broken metrics, but I am going to put out another webinar probably here in the next week or two, where we will talk about the metrics you should be using, where we will talk about the metrics that are important for finding out if your marketing's working, if you're getting in the right houses, if you're in the right geography. And those will be our next couple videos. So I appreciate you all coming by today and spending some time with me. And thank you again to all of you who came down and saw me in Florida and have followed up, especially with emails and all the kind words you guys have said about my presentation. I greatly appreciate it. And I thank each and every one of you who joined us today. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, follow it up with a phone call, and if you'd love to find out what your marketing looks like, hey, do one of those too, and we'll be happy to put a report together for you. I appreciate your time today. I'm Eric Weitrell with Stochastic Marketing. I'll talk to you later. Thanks.